Hello and welcome everyone to TheoryCraft, the series where we take concepts and make theoretical techniques to accomplish the goals we set for ourselves. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the properties of enderpearls and seeing whether or not we can keep them in a falling state for use in multiplayer teleporters. But as always, before we do any theory crafting itself, we need to know exactly how enderpearls work, and to understand the underlying game mechanics behind them. When the enderpearl is thrown, it is not thrown in the exact direction you are looking in. There is a tiny bit of random variation with each throw, which makes super precise measurements almost impossible to achieve. Furthermore, the velocity which the enderpearl is thrown at also varies. The exact magnitude of this variation is calculated as follows. Firstly, we take initial velocity vector, which is 1.466 in the direction of the line of sight, yaw and pitch. The final enderpearl velocity vector is then equal to 1.5 times by the initial velocity vector plus 0.007 times by the unit vector in the direction of travel times by a random number r, where r is between 0 and 1. Enderpearls can't be thrown when looking directly at fences, doors, fence gates, and some other blocks. Enderpearls can also be thrown through nether portals and the end. The enderpearl then teleports into the end or nether, respectively, but does not continue to teleport the player. Enderpearl collision. Enderpearls collide with all opaque blocks, including slime blocks and some entities such as cows, withers, and ignited TNT. They also collide with the Ender Dragon. However, they completely pass through the Ender Dragon when he is playing his death animation. Enderpearls do not collide with arrows, other enderpearls, snowballs, and XP orbs. Enderpearls can pass through both water and lava blocks. Water has the added effect of slowing down the enderpearls. Lava, on the other hand, has no effect on the enderpearl's speed, however it does set the enderpearls on fire. Enderpearls can pass through partial blocks, given that they are thrown through the non-solid part. This includes signs, which is strange because normally we can walk straight through them. Enderpearls also collide with cobweb and block 36. Enderpearls are thrown out at roughly 15 meters per second. We can imitate a thrown enderpearl with the following command. Take note of the motion vector of 1.5 here, and then the owner of the enderpearl here. Enderpearls can be launched in any direction by using slime blocks and explosions. This counts for all explosions. TNT explosions, ghast explosions, wither explosions, and creeper explosions. To create a mechanism which holds an enderpearl in stasis, we are going to have to use all of this information and very precise experimental measurements. We will also require all our knowledge of chunk loading from the first episode of TheoryCraft. When all of this information is totally united, we will be ready to create an SMP-friendly Enderpearl Stasis chamber and create a fully SMP-friendly teleporter in vanilla Minecraft. Mechanisms. The first thing I tried was our good old friend TNT. My idea was essentially to hook up a mob farm which would save creepers and skeletons. These mobs would then be aggravated with each other and be led down beneath the enderpearl. The creeper would then blow up and propel the enderpearl upwards. We would then ensure that another creeper was below before the enderpearl hit the ground due to gravity. To simplify this, I first needed to know whether it was possible to create the stasis chamber with explosions. So I made a clock to continually spawn ignited TNT with a fuse of 0 ticks. There's no denying that it worked. The enderpearl stayed hovering above the continually blowing up TNT. However, the issue that finally led me away from this technique was that it would be incredibly unstable if you were to rely completely on creepers. Perhaps it would be possible to use skeletons in minecarts, similar to the old AFKable cobble farm that ZipCrowd made. But the instability of relying on mob caps and unclear mob ignite times warded me away from this technique and made me seek out another: slime blocks. Slime blocks have a very interesting property. They can launch entities when pushed by a piston. Ultimately, this creates the same effect as explosives, except it doesn't rely on the instabilities explained before. So at first, I tried to use merely a column of air on top of the slime blocks. After much testing, I got the slime block to launch the Enderpearl in the air 13 times. However, sadly I got to the stage where the Enderpearl couldn't bounce at all, because it was out of position both before and after the game tick. Then boom, it hit me. Why not use water to slow the Enderpearl down? This is where we start seeing success. I managed to launch the Enderpearl 21 times consecutively. However, I am almost 100% sure that in this design we will eventually see success. The reason is because I recorded the timings between the launches and graphed them. These are my results, and as you can see by this graph, the timings are getting close to normalizing. The lime green line is a logarithmic average of the data. As we can see, it is closely approaching a region of zero gradient. When we reach this 0 point, it is likely we will have a completely repeatable pattern, which we can just clock for complete stasis of the Enderpearl. We can see this a lot clearer if we compress the graph. To further demonstrate to you that this data is approaching a repeatable pattern, have a look at the error bars in grey here. The error bars show one standard deviation plus and minus the mean of the results. As we can see, our first point is way outside of the error bars. However, as the number of bounces increases, our Enderpearl is getting closer and closer to complete synchronicity. We can see this because the results are further and further inside the error bars. The current design holds up the Enderpearl for 51 seconds, but I believe with your help we'll be able to bump this up to infinity. However, is this truly the end of our story? No. 2 problems remain. The first is that of lazy chunks, and the second is, how do we get the Enderpearl into the stasis chamber at the same point and at the same time? Lazy logic. The first problem is a pretty serious one. Enderpearls do not move at all in lazy chunks. However, redstone itself stays active. That is, the timer will continue ticking while the Enderpearl is not falling, creating a desynchronization between the Enderpearl oscillation and the timing circuit. This means we need a failsafe for when the stasis chamber enters lazy chunks. For explanatory reasons, we will now call the chunk that contains the Enderpearl stasis chamber the stasis chunk. Ideally, we would have a system which detects when one of the chunks, 2 chunks out from the stasis chunk, unloads. This will probably be the fastest way of detecting when the stasis chunk becomes lazy. It is also possible to use moving entities to detect when the stasis chunk itself becomes lazy, though this may increase instability. After detecting whether or not the chunk is lazy, we would want the timer to completely stop. With a repeater chain, we could easily do this using the repeater locking mechanic. However, sometimes we will be using pistons and half-tick delays. Therefore, we will occasionally need some extra logic to detect those half-ticks. Stasis initiation. Now we're going to deal with the second problem. How do we get the Enderpearl into the stasis chamber? The first issue is that we need the Enderpearl to arrive at the machine in a very precise location at a very precise time. As we know, there is currently no way of detecting the Enderpearl without command blocks. So what else can we do? Well, instead, we can use one of the facts we were talking about earlier. Enderpearls can't be thrown when looking directly at fences, fence gates, doors and trapdoors. If we look directly at a fence, hold right click and then a piston retracts the fence for a brief period of time, we can throw an Enderpearl at a very specific time. If the angle the Enderpearl is thrown in is the same every time, it may be possible to trigger slime blocks at the exact moment when the Enderpearl is in the right position. We can also use a bed, like we've done before for the gas ball generators, to align the cursor at yaw equals 0 and pitch equals 0 to allow us to look in the same direction every time. It sounded good so far, right? Well, there is a teeny tiny bit of an issue, and something I overlooked initially. Enderpearls are thrown with a tiny bit of randomness to their direction, as I told you in the beginning of this video. This is a tiny bit of randomness, but for us it may mean the difference between a working and faulty system. But sadly, this is where I run out of answers again, and I need you to help me out so we can build the Enderpearl Stasis Chamber together. There are 4 major tasks that we need to complete here. Number 1. Construct a stasis chamber using creepers and skeletons, like the one the Zip Crowders used in their old cobble farm. This is just to see whether or not that would work better. Number 2. Compact and expand the timer for the slime block ender stasis chamber until we get a repeatable pattern. This will become very handy in the future. To expand on what I have already, there will be a world download in the description and a table of all my results so far. Number 3. Construct and perfect a system which detects when the stasis chunk becomes lazy, using 12 unloaded chunk detectors and a 12 input OR gate. Reliable chunk loaders would also be a possible solution to this issue. Also, checking the consistency of entity-based lazy chunk detectors would be great, as this may be our best solution. Finally, number 4. Create an Enderpearl starting station, where we can throw an Enderpearl and start the stasis chamber with precise timings. So go forth, mess around with these concepts, challenge your friends, and bring this idea to the big redstoners out there. And in the end, we may see survival multiplayer friendly vanilla teleporters. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of TheoryCraft. Please support me with a like if you enjoyed this video and leave your comments down below.